Once upon a time, there was an old man and his wife that lived in a cottage beside the sea, far away from any other habitations. They had 3 daughters. The oldest was called Frida, the second was called Olga, and the youngest was Helga. Now the parents were not rich, only owning a few acres of land that they worked themselves. But Frida and Olga were always treated as princesses and never had to do any work. They sat all day amusing themselves with the finery that their father brought them when he had been traveling to the neighboring town, whilst Helga, who was far more beautiful and clever than either of her sisters, was always kept in the background. She never shared any pleasures that her older sisters often enjoyed. No presents were ever brought home to her. All day long, from early morning till late at night, poor Helga had to work and toil for the whole family, receiving nothing but sour looks and often blows from the older sisters. One day it happened that the fire on their earth had allowed to go out. Helga had been busy working in the field, so they would have to go a long way to fetch fresh fire. The old man decided to send Frida to get it. At first Frida grumbled, for she was trying to dress her hair in a new way. But then she thought a walk through the woods might be rather pleasant, so off she went. After she had gone some distance, she came to a hillock and heard a deep voice saying,
"Would you rather have me with you or against you?"
Frida, thinking that it was some woodcutter, said she did not care in the least, and it was very impertinent of him to address her, and she went on to the cave where she would fetch the fire. When she got to the cave, to her great surprise, she saw a cauldron filled with meat boiling on the fire, beside which stood a pan filled with dough, waiting to be made into cakes, and not a creature in sight. Frida, being very hungry after her long walk, stirred up the fire beneath the cauldron to make the meat boil quickly, and then began baking some cakes. She made one especially for herself, and let the others burn so that they were uneatable. As soon as the meat was cooked, she took a bowl, she filled it with all the best bits, sat down and had a good meal. Finishing it with the cake. Just as she had finished, a big dog ran up to her and began wagging his tail, begging for food. But Frida angrily gave him a slap and chased him away. The dog grew angry and bit one of her hands. Screaming with fright and pain, Frida jumped, and in a hurry to get away, forgot all about the fire she was to bring and ran home to tell her parents. They were very sorry, both for her sore hand, which they bathed and bandaged, and the lack of fire. It was really unfortunate, for the cave was the nearest place where they could go to renew the fire. So even though they were unwilling to send Olga, who was their pet and favorite, she had to go, for they feared that if they sent Helga, she might run away and never come back again. And then there would be no one to vent their bad tempers on, or to do the work of the whole household. For did she not wait on her mother and father and both of her sisters? So it was decided that Olga must go. Alas, Olga fared no worse than her sister. She was so spoiled that she thought she ought to have the best of everything. So when she reached the cave, she too helped herself to the best bits of meat and making a nice cake for herself. And then she threw the rest of the dough on the fire. And the dog came up to her and wagged his tail. He sat up and begged for some food. Olga took up some of the boiling broth and threw it on him. This made the dog very angry, so he jumped off and bit the point of her nose. Olga ran home screaming and crying with only half a nose and no fire. This time the parents were quite beside themselves with anger and decided Helga must go to fetch the fire. If she succeeded, well and good, and if not, well, the dog might eat her for all they care. It would be a good riddance. So taking a big fire shovel, Helga went on her way to the cave. As she passed the hillock, she too heard a voice saying,
Would you rather have anything or get us to?
To this question she answered, a well-known proverb says, there is nothing so bad that it's not better to have it on your side than against you. So as I do not know who you are, who is asking me this question, I would rather you were with me than against me. And hearing nothing further and seeing no one, Helga continued on her way till she reached the cave. Here she found everything the same as her sisters. The cauldron was on the fire. The dough was ready for baking. But instead of thinking only about herself, Helga looked after the meat and saw it was very, very nicely cooked. And then with great care, she made up the dough into cakes and never thought about taking anything for herself. Even though she was very hungry, for she had nothing for breakfast but some hard dried crusts and a glass of water. Neither would she now help herself to any of the fire without asking permission from the owner of the cave. Feeling very tired after her long walk, Helga sat down to rest, but she had hardly done so when she heard a loud rumbling noise. The ground began to tremble, and Helga, fearful that the cave might fall in, turned to run out. But as she turned, she saw a big, three-headed giant standing at the entrance, followed by a big dog. Helga was terribly frightened, but being fond of animals, she held out her hand and patted the dog, and she gained her courage when the giant, in a kind voice, said, "You have done your work well, which you found waiting here. It is only right, therefore, that you should get your share. Sit down and share my dinner, and afterwards you can take home some of the fire that you have come for." The giant got a bowl and helped Helga to some broth, carefully giving her the tenderest bits of meat. As he did so, the ground again began to shake and tremble, and fearful noises, like claps of thunder, frightened Helga greatly. But in a gentle voice, he bade her to be beside him, and she finished her broth. The giant then gave her one of the cakes she had baked. But no sooner had she finished it than the ground again began to shake and tremble. The thunder roared, and flash after flash of lightning lit up the cave. Helga was so terrified that she ran right to the giant for protection, and she clung to his arm, and the noises ceased. As the darkness passed away, Helga saw that the giant disappeared, and that she was holding on to the arm of a handsome young prince. "Do not be frightened," he said. "I can never thank you enough, dear Helga, for you have rescued me from a horrible enchantment the wicked fairy Gondomar pronounced at my birth. I am Torkil, the son of King Osbert, who reigns in a neighboring island. But because my father refused to marry Gondomar and chose my mother instead, the wicked fairy condemned me to go through life as a three-headed monster. Until some young girl should, despite my frightful appearance, place full trust and confidence in me." Then Helga told him her story and why she came to the cave. Also about the fate of her sisters who had gone to the cave on the same errand, adding that she must hasten back with the fire else her father and mother would scold and beat her. "You shall not be ill-treated any more," replied Torquil, and he went to the back of the cave and presently returned, carrying a casket and a small bundle in his hands. "See, this casket contains jewels and precious stones. You can give some to your sisters, but this," and he placed the bundle in her hand, "you must wear it under your own dress when you get home, and be very careful that no one sees it." Helga could not repress a cry of admiration when she saw the lovely gifts and thanked him warmly. Torquil then filled her fire shovel and carried it for her some part of the way home. But when they came inside the cottage, he stopped. He took her hand and he placed a heavy gold ring on her finger. "Keep this ring, dear Helga," he said, "and let no one take it from you. It will not be long till I come back and claim my bride. But I must first return to my parents and tell them the joyful news that the wicked charm has been broken at last." With these words, he took a loving farewell of Helga, and both started their homeward journey. When Helga reached the cottage, and her parents saw that she had succeeded in bringing back the fire, Helga, for once in her life, received a kind word of welcome. But when she showed them the basket and was about to give her sister some of the jewels, they seized upon it, and dividing the contents among themselves, they might have taken her beautiful dress if she had not been precautioned to slip it under her own gown, so no one knew anything about it. Days passed on, and matters relapsed to their former way. Frida and Olga did nothing all day but deck themselves with the jewels, quarreling and fighting over them, and Helga, as before, had to do the work for the whole family. One day, her mother had been up to the higher meadow for some herbs, came back and said that she had seen a beautiful ship lying at anchor on the shore below. The old man hastened to the strand to find out who the owner might be, and seeing a boat pulling off from it, he waited till the stranger, who was a handsome young man, had landed, and began a conversation with him. He asked him many questions, but was unable to find out his name. Then the young man began to question him about how many children he had. "Only 2 daughters," he said, "and such good and beautiful girls they are. I should much like to see them," said the stranger. The old man, greatly delighted, led the way back to the cottage, where his 2 eldest daughters had hurried to put on their best frocks and the jewels from Helga's basket. The stranger expressed himself as being very pleased with the girls, but he asked, "Why has one of your daughters got her hand tied up with cloth, and the other with her nose covered?" At first the father said they had met an accident and slipped down the cliffs, but when the stranger pressed for further information, the story about the cave and the dog was told. "But surely you have another daughter," said the stranger, "one who I know is kind to animals." At first the old man and his wife both declared they had only 2 daughters, but the stranger kept on urging him until he finally admitted that he had another girl, but she was so ugly, lazy, and wicked that she's more like some wild animal than a human being. But the stranger said he did not mind at all, and he must see her, so the old man was obliged at last to call Helga. The poor girl came out of the kitchen dressed just as she was, in a shabby dress, when the young man went up to her and he took her hand. Helga revealed the bundle to her sisters, who were enraged that the prince had given this to her. Prince Torquil was very angry with the old man and the 2 sisters for all the unkindness that they had shown Helga, so he wanted the sisters to give back the jewels they had taken from her. But Helga begged that they might keep a few, and the prince consented to it. Then he led Helga down to the shore and took her on board his beautiful ship to sail to his own country to meet his parents. When they arrived home, the king and queen were waiting for them. Very happy to meet the girl who had broken the curse. They planned a big wedding where everyone was invited. And like all fairy tales, they lived happily ever after.